Okay. Is the muscle activity showing on your screen share?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, muscle activity. So this stands for neuromuscular junction. Okay, muscular. I do shorthand junction. Okay, the motor unit and contraction. All right, so let's do a little reminder here of how our nervous system works. Okay, so you have the brain and the body. Okay, now what I'm about to draw we'll cover in more detail once we get to the nervous system. Okay, so as the body communicates to the brain, that is afferent communication. And as the brain communicates to the body, that's efferent. Okay, so body to brain, afferent, and it's usually denoted in blue when you look at anatomy books. And motor is usually expressed in red in anatomy books. Okay, so motor, which is also known as efferent, is brain to body. Okay, so afferent is sensory, efferent is motor. They basically mean the same thing. Okay, so the red and the blue is just done to make it easy for you visually as you're learning sensory and motor and neuro stuff. And most anatomy books, as they're drawing out these animations for you, they do that just to try to keep it simple and to separate. Here's the sensory pathways, and they kind of do those in blue, and here's the motor pathways, and they'll do those in red. Okay, so sensory is body to brain, that's afferent, and then brain to body is motor or efferent. Now, when it comes to muscle activity, um, and you see the word neuromuscular junction, all right, you know you're dealing with nerves that are going to help with the motor unit. And you see this word motor, think movement. Okay, right? It's like the motor in your car is what allows you to move, allows the vehicle to move. Okay, so even though these words kind of sound fancy, um, they're trying to tell you exactly what's going on. So the neuromuscular junction, that's where the nerve and the muscle come together, and it's the electrical activity that allows you to move. Okay, and that's our contraction. Okay, all right, so first you have to have, for a muscle to contract, you have to have this thing called irritability. Okay, now that's a funny word because, usually when we say irritability, we're annoyed. Okay, but this is different. All right, irritability is the ability to receive and respond to a stimulus. Okay, so receive and respond to a stimulus. Okay, then you need contractility. Okay, and contractility is the ability to shorten. Okay, so muscles start out long, and then when they contract, okay, they shorten. Okay, so you can see the length of the muscle gets shorter in a contraction. So the ability to shorten when an adequate stimulus is received. Okay, so that's an important word there, adequate. Okay, I don't think a 9-volt battery will start your car. It's not enough electricity. It's not adequate stimulus. So our body does need a certain amount of electricity in order to start contracting muscles. Okay, so for muscles to contract and that whole complicated process, that's called an action potential. So skeletal muscle must be stimulated by a nerve in order to contract. Okay. And then one motor neuron may stimulate a few muscle cells or hundreds of them. It just depends on the body part that we're looking at. Okay. Like, for example, your hand and the muscles in your hand are very, very detailed and very fine motor. So you can do things like calligraphy, stencil stuff. You can write, you can do art. Um, you can type on a computer, very detailed. You can do stitches. Okay. You can do surgery stuff, very fine motor skills and the muscles in your hand versus say the muscles in your quadricep, okay, which is your thigh muscle, right? Try to think of the detailed work your quad does. Well, it doesn't. That's a gross thing, gross motor movement. Your quad muscle allows you to jump and run and pick up heavy things. It's much different than the hand. Okay, so the details that the nervous system has to go through to operate your fingers in your hand is a little different than how it operates your quad muscle. Okay. So this one neuron and the skeletal muscle cells it stimulates are called a motor unit. All right, and here's a picture of that. So here's bone. All right, and here is your muscle that has been cut. So they can show you the inside parts of the muscle, and then they pulled out all the muscle fibers, okay, the individual muscle fibers. And then they're showing you that the spinal cord has a motor nerve. So this is movement that comes out and innervates the muscle cells. Okay. So these particular wires that you're seeing innervate that particular muscle or those particular muscle cells. Okay. And then obviously you've got lots of these throughout your body. And if you exercise, you will create more of these, right? So if you do weightlifting and you gain muscle mass, then you gain new muscle, new nerves. If you're more of an endurance person, like running, biking, swimming, that kind of thing, then you'll create nerves that will allow you to do more long distance things like running. Okay. So, in other words, in the sports world, in the exercise world, the first thing to develop is your nervous system. Okay. So that's one reason why it takes time to start to see results from whatever workouts you like to do. And you can break workouts down into aerobic or anaerobic, with oxygen or without oxygen. Okay. So with oxygen is your endurance sports, your endurance events, your endurance exercises. And anaerobic is more without oxygen, which would be more like weightlifting or weight training. Okay. But either way, either one you pick, could be both. The first thing to develop is your nervous system first, and then all the different cells and all that start to follow. Okay, so it takes time, and that's the part that frustrates people. Is everybody wants a quick fix, and they want to lose 30 pounds overnight, and they want to get really big and strong overnight, and that's tough because our body doesn't work that way. Okay, so these things take time. Okay, so the nerve fibers when they come out from the spine. Oh, but let me show you something from the spinal cord. Okay, so here's a cross section of the spinal cord, and this is the anterior part of the spinal cord, or ventral. Okay, so I'm introducing some nervous system things to you, and we'll dive into more detail with these when we get to the nervous system. But these are some things you need to know to help you understand um, neuromuscular junction stuff. Okay, so when you look at a cross section of the spinal cord, um, we have an anterior side and a posterior side, or dorsal. Okay, and both um, words, the AKAs, know both, because you really never know when you're reading material, when you're taking a test, okay, what the author, what word they choose to use. All right, I just got done taking an exam. So in my PT, sports medicine, dry needling world, you can take many different um, courses and seminars, and you can continue your training, right? So I just got done taking advanced needling, dry needling training, and it was about 30 hours over the weekend. And um, this is basically doctorate level stuff that they're throwing at you with muscle origin, insertion, action, neurological innervation, making sure you know what the muscle is inside the human body and where the sensitive structures are, because they don't want you to hit arteries, veins, and nerves. Okay, so we go into that in great detail, and I noticed that the um, organization that wrote this particular seminar and wrote these exams, and the lecture material, they were using AKAs, um, things that I haven't really seen in a long time as far as the language. But it's like, okay, I mean, that's what it is. And so you just never know. And by the way, that was a wonderful seminar. And we're all lab partners with each other, all these docs in the room, and we treat each other. And because of the concentration and how many muscles and all the advanced stuff that we're doing, we all had about 150 needles put in us over the weekend. So I'm still a little sore from all that. If you've ever been dry needled, you'll probably only get 3 or 4 or 5 needle insertions in, one treatment session. It's usually somewhere around in there, just a handful. Okay. Imagine getting 150. But it was great. It was absolutely wonderful seminar, great people. Um, okay, so the anterior part of your spinal cord, so let's divide this in half. Okay. The anterior part of your spinal cord, and what I'm about to tell you, don't ever forget this. Okay, this will stick with you for forever academically. The anterior part of the spinal cord is responsible for motor. Okay, movement. The posterior aspect of the spinal cord is responsible for sensory. Okay. Now we'll get into more of that when we get into the nervous system, but for now, as a very simple version, the anterior part of your spinal cord is responsible for motor. So the wires that come out are motor wires, motor nerves, motor neurons. And the wires that go into the posterior part of the spinal cord, that's sensory. Okay. Another way of saying that is afferent. So the afferent wires that come from the body into your spinal cord, they go in the posterior aspect of the cord. And the wires that leave the spinal cord, those are your motor wires, and that's going to allow for movement. So, simply put, it's sensory in, okay, sensory in, motor out. Okay, sensory in, motor out. And then in this picture, you'll notice that the wires are coming out of the ventral horn. Okay, remember ventral and anterior are the same thing. Okay, so some books say anterior horn, some books say ventral horn. So now you know, just by hearing the word ventral horn or anterior horn, you're dealing with a motor nerve, an afferent nerve. Okay, so as far as the anatomy of this particular nerve going into the muscle, all right, we have different components. So here's the spinal cord up here, right, with that butterfly shaped, okay, that we saw here. And you'll hear me reference that quite a bit, just the butterfly shaped. Okay, there it is. And that's the gray matter, okay. So the nerve comes out. So there's your axon. And this happens to be a motor axon because it's coming out of the ventral horn. And, you know, they can be long. So there's the nerve, it's coming down. And eventually you get to the end of the nerve. And that's called the axon terminal. Okay, once you get to the very end, that's the axon terminal. Okay. So what happens is now let's look at the axon terminal up close. All right, the axon terminal embeds itself into the muscle. So here you're seeing the muscle tissue. Okay, this whole thing that we're looking at is the neuromuscular junction. Okay, what happens is the axon terminal nerve embeds itself into the muscle, as you can see here, embeds itself into the muscle. Now, you'll notice we have a space here. That space is called the synaptic cleft. Okay, that space is called the synaptic cleft. All right, so axon comes in. All right, the axon comes in. And then the end of it is the axon terminal, embeds itself into the muscle. You've got this space here called the synaptic cleft. Okay, so all that is the synaptic cleft. Okay, now you just saw the entire or one aspect of the neuromuscular junction. Here's another animation of it. Axon comes in, embeds itself into a muscle fiber, creates that space, which is the synaptic cleft. Now, inside of the axon, you have synaptic vesicles. Okay. For now, we'll just call them chemicals. More specifically, neurotransmitters. And I like to do shorthand NT for neurotransmitter. So inside you find neurotransmitters. So when an electrical signal comes in, it will tell those synaptic vesicles to release the neurotransmitters, and they go across the synaptic cleft to the postsynaptic membrane. Okay, so I'm going to be throwing some more terms at you here. All right. So you have the presynaptic terminal. Okay. Presynaptic terminal. You might also read presynaptic membrane. Okay. So it's your simple formula is pre to post, right? Remember, if you have trouble accessing the information, just grab the file, open it up, pre to post. Oh, okay, I got it. I get it. And what that means is, or what I mean is a signal is coming down. That's the first part of the signal. So that is your pre. So that's the presynapse. Now a synapse is your electrical transfer. Okay, it's an electrical transfer. All right, I'm going to use um, an analogy here. Okay, this analogy works for people. Um, but I also hope it doesn't upset you. Okay, and that is a taser. All right. So I think everybody knows what a taser is. It's an electrical device that has terminals, and when you turn it on, it emits electricity. Okay. So if if I am holding the taser, I am the pre-synapse. If I make contact to skin, to tissue, that is now transferring the energy into that tissue. So that would be the post synapse. All right. So you're holding this electrical device, you push the button, now electricity is coming out. All those little sparks, those are the neurotransmitters. And now you make contact, that's the post synaptic tissue, the postsynaptic membrane, and you're transferring all that energy into the other tissue. And as a result, something is going to happen. Now, because of the amount of volts in a taser, it um, it's supposed to make your muscles kind of freeze up, right? You kind of lock up. But in the human body, obviously the volts aren't that high, so it's a smooth and coordinated muscle contraction. But that just gives you an idea, a visual, hopefully, of what we're talking about here. You've got pre, and then you make contact, and then there's post. You're transferring it to the other side. So here's the pre-synaptic terminal. All this energy is released. All these chemicals are released, and it goes to the post-synaptic membrane, which is simply the other side. And then once that happens, then something is going to happen. In this case, it's a muscle contraction. Okay. Now your neuromuscular junction, and what all this is saying is basically what we just talked about, pre and post, and the chemicals that are released. So let's start filling in some of the gaps here. So you have the pre-nerve. Now I'm simplifying this. The pre-nerve or the pre-synaptic membrane is now going to release acetylcholine. Okay, that is one of your neurotransmitters. Acetylcholine is one of our neurotransmitters. We have many neurotransmitters, that's one of them. Okay, so acetylcholine is released and it goes through that synaptic cleft. Okay, and then it binds to the post tissue. Okay, the tissue that's on the other side, it binds to it. And then something's going to happen. In this case, a muscle contraction. Okay, now what I mean by something is going to happen is nerves innervate everything in your body. Okay, so depending on the tissue that the nerve is communicating with depends on what happens. So if the nerve is talking to a gland, it tells it to release the digestive enzyme or the saliva or whatever from the gland, or a gland can also release a hormone. If the nerve is going to your heart, it tells the heart to beat. Okay, if the nerve is going to your blood vessels, it tells your blood vessels to dilate or constrict. And if the nerve is going to your skeletal muscle, it tells it to contract, right? So in our body, the nervous system is very complex, millions of wires, lots of connections because your nervous system functions everything. So, very simply put, when a nerve communicates to tissue, then something's going to happen, and it just depends on the function of that tissue. Now, the function of skeletal muscle is movement. So, in this case, we're looking at muscle contraction. Okay, other things that are involved with muscle contraction is you need sodium, you need your potassium, you also need calcium, which we'll look at in a minute. Okay, once you get all of these ingredients together, neurotransmitters and your different ions, this is going to result in an electrical change, and you're going to get an action potential. In other words, we have enough electricity to allow for movement. So back to our battery analogy, that 9-volt battery to try to start your car is not enough juice. It's not enough of an electrical input. It's not enough of an action potential. So you need a bigger battery that has all the juice you need to start the car. Okay, but that little 9-volt is enough juice to turn on a flashlight. Okay, so in our body, certain things need only a certain amount of electricity, and other things need more electricity. And all that is your action potential. How much electrical current is generated to make a change? Action potential. Once you start the action potential, it can't be stopped. Okay, it just keeps going. So it's kind of like if you have a copper wire and you touch it with something electrical, well, the electricity is simply going to go down the copper wire and you're not going to stop it. It just goes down it. Okay, once acetylcholine does its job, once acetylcholine crosses that synaptic cleft to the postsynaptic membrane, and after it's used, it is now broken down. Your body takes the acetylcholine and breaks it down to its acetic acid and choline components. And the enzyme that does that is acetylcholine esterase. Remember, every time you add ace to a word, you know you're dealing with an enzyme. So acetylcholine is broken down into its individual ingredients, acetic acid and choline. Okay, one reason for this is so that your body does not keep contracting the muscle over and over and over again because of the presence of the acetylcholine. So once acetylcholine hits, it allows for the electrical activity, and then it's immediately broken down into its acetic acid and choline components. And then these are actually sent back. Your body collects these, sends them back up into the axon terminal to be recycled, to be remanufactured. Okay, so here's um, another picture of this. All right, so you've got the electrical signal coming in, goes to the axon terminal. It tells those synaptic vesicles that contain the acetylcholine, there's acetylcholine in there. When it hits that, they basically open up, release themselves, right? Release the acetylcholine. Right now, here it is over here. There's acetylcholine. It goes across the synaptic cleft to the postsynaptic membrane, binds to the receptor. Okay. Calcium is involved. Sodium, potassium is involved. You get your electrical change, and now muscle contraction happens. The graph of the action potential. Okay, so we only have a few more slides, so hang in there before we take a break. All right, so first of all, they measure this in millivolts. Okay, so when you study this and you want to see, how muscle contracts and all that, and the electroactivity, they're going to measure it in millivolts. Okay, so some parts on this graph I want you to know. Okay, the dotted line that you see here, that's the threshold line. And that is at negative 55 millivolts. Okay, so in other words, you need at least negative 55 millivolts of electricity in order for the muscle to respond and start to contract. Okay, so at rest, you're at negative 70 millivolts. And then all of a sudden, some electrical activity is starting to come in. And now it's enough stimulation to start to increase and get to your negative 55. And once you hit that, then watch. It goes boom, boom, boom. All of a sudden, the contraction happens. Okay, once you hit negative 55, it just goes boom, boom. It's very quick. And then the electricity goes up to positive 30 millivolts. Okay, and once it's done, then it starts to go back down to its resting membrane potential, which is negative 70 millivolts. Okay, to give you a hope, maybe an easier visual, if you're going to shock a patient or the AED device, okay, the paddles, the electrical paddles, you place it over the heart, hit it, right? Now I'm going to oversimplify this, but just to give you an idea. So the heart isn't quite working right. Okay, so here's the graph. Not much electricity. Then you hit them really hard with that defibrillator, and then boom, a huge spike in electricity. Okay, just a crazy high spike because you hit them with massive amounts of electricity. So really not much electrical activity, and then boom, that's where you hit them. And you hit them again, boom. And you hit them again, boom. Huge spikes. Okay, so the computer is picking up on how much juice is being sent into the tissue. Okay, that's all this is. the computer is picking up on your own body's electrical activity. So as soon as you hit yourself with your own electricity, then boom, then another muscle contraction, then another muscle contraction. All right. So the up part is called depolarization. In simple terms, that's the contraction. Okay, in simple terms, that's the contraction. So whenever you hear depolarization, think contraction. What happens is sodium is entering into the cell. Sodium is rushed in. So let's go back to this, where you have a cell at rest and a cell in motion. Okay, a cell at rest has a high concentration of potassium on the inside and a high concentration of sodium on the outside. Once all this action potential stuff starts to take place, now the cell is being set in motion. So the sodium rushes in and the potassium leaves. Okay, sodium rushes in and the potassium leaves. And that's what they're trying to show you here, is that now the cell is in motion, so sodium rushes in. That's depolarization or contraction. Once it reaches its peak, okay, that's the the complete action potential part. So the electricity comes up, hits where it needs to be. Okay, the graph can only go so high because of the electrical input. Once you reach that peak part, that's considered the action potential. Now it's going to do the downward slope here, which is repolarization, which is now relaxing, right? Contract, relax, contract, relax, depolarize, repolarize. So when you hear the word repolarization, just think it's relaxing. When you hear depolarization, think contraction. Okay, during the repolarization process, now you have to be careful. I don't really like how they said this here. Potassium leaves. I mean, it's not wrong to say it this way. It's kind of like saying, can someone please turn the dark off? If you're in a dark room and you walk in and you say, please turn off the dark, you're like, what? Well, what they meant was turn the lights on. And so by turning the lights on, you're turning the dark off. It's just a very weird way of saying the same thing. Like in sports, you're watching a sporting event, and someone comes in and asks, who's not losing? You're like, what? Because that's not how we normally talk. Normally we say, who's winning? But to say who's not losing, like you could ask that question. It's just a very weird way of asking the same question. Well, that's what this is. Potassium is leaving. Okay. What they mean is, let's go back to our cells here. So there's your cell at rest. There's your cell in motion. Okay. So potassium is leaving the extracellular space and going back into the cell. That's what they mean by this one. So you got to be careful on what they're referencing. So is sodium leaving? If it is, what does that mean? If potassium is leaving, well, what does that mean? Well, you have to recognize where it is to begin with. So once you have a contraction, sodium has left, excuse me, potassium has left. Okay, remember, potassium leaves, sodium enters. And so to say potassium is leaving, that means it's leaving the extracellular space and going back into the cell. And if that's happening, that means sodium is leaving, going back to the extracellular space. So it's going to its original position. Okay, so that's repolarization, and the electrical graph is going to decline. Then you get this thing called hyperpolarization, where it actually dips down below 70 millivolts. And then it goes back to the resting membrane potential at negative 70. When you give it enough electricity, it'll go up to negative 55, and then boom, boom, starts all over again. All right. This is an all or none response. So once you hit that threshold, it is now all or none. And remember, the threshold is negative 55 millivolts of electricity. Once you hit that, it's going to spike up, spike down, depolarize, repolarize. It's all or none. The whole muscle cell contracts. Okay. Um, the graded response is being able to vary the response of the muscle contraction. Key word there. It's able to vary the response of the muscle contraction. So here's an example. If I give you a pencil to pick up off the table, honestly, you don't need that much force compared to picking up a 50-pound dumbbell. So if I have in front of you on the table a pencil and a 50-pound dumbbell, and I just simply say, hey, can you please pick up the pencil? You just do it. Like your brain and looking at the pencil and the motor skills, smooth and coordinated, just knows how to pick up a pencil and use the adequate graded response. And because you're looking at the 50-pound dumbbell, you already subconsciously know this is going to be heavy. So you kind of already predetermine how much of a graded response is to pick up the 50-pound dumbbell. And so you pick it up. Now, if I blindfolded you and say, I have two objects on the table and you don't know what they are, and I say, I want you to pick up item one, okay, you're going to pick it up. Because you don't know what it is, your body is going to make some calculations that you will now be aware of. Because remember, you took away the visual input. So your body has to calculate things a little bit differently. Now, it won't take long for you to figure out, oh, this is something very light. So I'm going to, and you pick it up. And then I move your hand over to pick up the dumbbell. Now, remember, you don't know what it is. I say, okay, pick this up. Now, at first, you'll probably pick it up and go, oh, that's remarkably heavy. And you will compensate to now pick it up. That's the graded response. Now, because we typically are also visualizing just about everything we do, your body makes those instantaneous calculations just as you go throughout the day. But if you're blindfolded, you'd have to make different calculations because you took away the visual input. Either way, your body compensates for the graded response. It's just quicker if you can add the visual input. Okay, because the vision and the calculations through your nervous system and your cerebellum and the muscle coordination and all this stuff we just talked about is very, very quick. Okay. If I put you across from me and I throw a baseball at you, you know, you've got a baseball mitt and I throw a baseball at you, you can make some pretty quick calculations on how to catch that ball based on the ball's speed and trajectory. Okay. And this is how we operate throughout the day. Some very simple tasks like washing your hands and pushing down on the soap dispenser to more complicated things like hitting a golf ball or shooting a basketball, running and dribbling, you know, things like that. Very advanced calculations, all based off of smooth and coordinated muscle contractions and graded responses. So the graded responses um, adapt by changing the frequency, which is the speed of the stimulation, and then changing the strength, which is how many muscle cells are being recruited. When you pick up that pencil, you really don't need that many muscles to be recruited. You pick up the 50-pound dumbbell, you do need more muscles to be recruited. Okay, as the graded response is continuing and the electrical impulse and all the muscles that are being recruited and all that is building and building, that is called being summed, which means being added together, right? So in math, if you want the sum, you add things together. Okay. I think the product is multiplication. So if you want the sum, you just add everything together. So they call it summed. When the sum occurs, the contraction of the muscle gets stronger and smoother. So once that happens, the muscle is considered in complete tetanus or tectonic contraction. They're AKAs of each other. So you are in now complete tetanus. Full muscle contraction, everything has been summed together, and it is enough of a graded response to now operate the task at hand, picking up the pencil or picking up the weight. Okay. Now, don't confuse this tetanus with the bacteria tetanus. Okay. So, tetanus just means contraction. When you have the bacteria tetanus, then the muscle gets the contraction of your muscles is so hard, is so aggressive in the bacteria version of tetanus. Okay, you're rigid. You're literally frozen. Like your body cannot move. It's also known as lockjaw. Okay, so bacteria tetanus also is known as lockjaw because if a person gets this, they're locked up. So they are in this hardcore bacterial version of tectonic contraction and they can't unlock. Okay, that's tetanus in the bacteria world. But in the physiology world, tetanus is a muscle contraction based off of the smooth graded response. Okay, so don't confuse the two. You're like, what? Tetanus? Okay, this is the healthy version of a muscle contraction. Okay, so there it is, the bacterium tetanus, also known as lockjaw, where your muscles go into an uncontrollable spasm. And they get it from the Greek word tetnos, so convulsion or tension or contraction. Okay, any questions on what we just covered? All right. So myofilaments are the tiny components that are found inside the muscle, and they are the actin and the myosin. Okay, inside of a muscle cell, all right, we're going to take out one particular strand and zoom in and look at it. And we have different components to this muscle fiber or muscle cell. Okay. And if you notice or look closely, you'll see that um, here is a section, there is a section, and there is a section, and so on. So the length of that muscle um, will have several of these sections that I just boxed off here called a sarcomere throughout the length of the muscle. So here would be another one, and another one, and another one. And however long the muscle is, you'll have sarcomeres, okay? Now, I try to, like, one way you can visualize this is like a Coke can, okay? So if you take a Coke can and put it right there, it's like, okay, there's a Coke can, and then you stack up another one, and you stack another one, and you just keep stacking them. Each Coke can would represent a sarcomere. So when you look at this from a distance, it looks like one long line, okay, one long tube. But when you come up close, you'll realize that they're broken down into each individual segments, and each segment is a sarcomere. Okay, and that's what you're looking at right here. So there's a sarcomere, and there's one, and there's one, and so on, the length of the muscle. Inside of each sarcomere, you're going to find the contractile units, the actin and the myosin. Okay, so we're going to look at one sarcomere. Okay, we're going to zoom into one sarcomere. And they go from Z disc to Z disc. Okay, here's a magnified view. So there's a sarcomere right there. So one of your Coke cans, since we have 3 of them here, we took that middle Coke can and we're going to pull that out and look at it. Okay, so if you were to stack those cans, the boundaries are Z disc to Z disc. And you can see that right here. Those are the boundaries. And then within that boundary, you find the contractile units, the actin and the myosin. Okay. The actin is the thin filament, and the myosin is the thick filament. Okay, those big red thick bands that you see there. So you have thin and thick. All right, so they're showing you that here with the thin filament, which is the actin, and the thick filament, which is the myosin. Okay, these are the myofilaments. Okay, these are the myofilaments, and you have 2 of them, actin and myosin, thin and thick. Okay, and these are the contractile units of your muscles. Okay, here it is there. Actin is the thin, myosin is the thick. They are protein. Okay, they contain the ATPase, which helps split off the ATP to generate power for the muscle contraction. Okay, so when you have adenosine triphosphate, okay, ATP is adenosine tri, which is 3, phosphate, it looks like this. Adenosine plus a phosphate plus a phosphate plus a phosphate. So there's your 3 phosphates. The high energy bond is right here. So when that particular phosphate breaks off, now you're left with a DP, which is adenosine diphosphate, because it's A plus P plus P. Okay, this one is missing because it was broken off, which releases energy. Okay, so when you break off that last phosphate group, you're going to release energy, which allows for muscle contraction. Okay, and so this is where our energy and our power and all that come from, is the fact that you have the ability to produce ATP in the body. Now, the different parts of the actin and myosin, okay, here's the myosin. You'll notice they have myosin heads. Okay, on the thin filament, this is the actin. Okay, this is where the myosin heads will bind to actin. Okay, so the myosin contain the heads of the cross bridges. Okay, and that's what you see there. And those heads will bind to actin. Okay, so actin, the thin filament, it's a contractile protein. Okay, they are anchored to the Z discs, and that whole thing creates that sarcomere. All right, so what ends up happening now, I'm going to explain. So all this that we're about to talk about, or that we're talking about, is called the sliding filament theory. Okay, remember your myofilaments are actin and myosin. Okay, the myofilaments, you can also just simply say filament. Okay, so these filaments are the actin and the myosin. All right, so what ends up happening is, if you look right here, that has a certain distance. Okay, and then when you compare it to the contraction below, this has a certain distance. You can tell it is shorter. It moved in. Okay. Remember, when a skeletal muscle contracts, when a skeletal muscle contracts, there's the muscle. When it contracts, they get shorter, right? So the muscle gets shorter, and you can see the boundary there versus the boundary there. So skeletal muscle always contracts and gets shorter in length. Okay, and so this is your sliding filament theory. All right, so there's the actin. There's the myosin. Okay, so what happens is, now I use the analogy of the oar in a boat, right? So if you're in a boat and you take the oar, right, you got your crew team or whatever, and you place the oar in water and you row and the oar goes this way, okay, it's going to push the boat forward. So the oar makes contact with water and you pull through it, so the oar goes backwards, which pushes the boat forward. So the myosin heads are kind of like that. When they bind, okay, so it was at rest, which is here, which means they're not binding. Okay, when ATP, when this is broken off, that releases energy, which forces the myosin head to now bind to the actin, and it's going to pull, just like the oar, it pulls. And on this side, at rest, and then it will bind when set in motion, and it pulls. And the pulling makes the muscle go shorter. Okay, so what I'd like for you to know is that when the myosin head binds to actin, it is going to pull, okay, allow for pulling, and you're going to go from a boundary that was like this, okay, the distance, and it simply gets shorter. Okay, and you can see the boundary there. It just gets shorter, okay? So actin and myosin need each other for the binding to take place so that the myosin heads can start to pull on the actin, creating the boundaries of the sarcomere, which is Z disc to Z disc, to get shorter. Okay, and you can see the distance now is shorter. Okay, you need calcium for this to work. Calcium is stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. All right, so here's the sarcoplasmic reticulum. It's that blue looking sleeve that you see there that surrounds each muscle fiber. That's called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. They store calcium. Okay, the sarcoplasmic reticulum stores and releases calcium when the muscle fiber is stimulated to contract. And what is this? Ultimately, what's the stimulation? Electricity. And as we say it, action potential. Okay, so our electrical input, which is our action potential, is what stimulates the calcium to be released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And calcium is part of our many ingredients. Calcium is part of our many ingredients to allow for muscle contraction to occur. Okay. On this particular slide, this shows you what's going on. Okay, so we're going to kind of now break it down. So in step 1 here, right, you've got the axon and the electrical signal comes down, forcing the neurotransmitters to be released across the synaptic cleft. As you can see here, the acetylcholine goes from the pre-membrane to the post-membrane. All right, this begins the electrical conduction. Okay, so an action potential is generated and is propagated along the sarcolemia down the T tubules. Okay, so now the electrical information is coming down, goes down the T tubules, which then stimulates the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay, there's your sarcoplasmic reticulum, this purple looking thing that you see. It stores calcium, and the calcium is now released. Okay, so you have calcium because acetylcholine started all this. Okay, generating electricity that's going down, and then calcium is released. All right, when that happens, the adenosine, the ATP, is broken down, so that phosphate is broken off, which is energy, which allows the myosin head to now go and bind to the actin. Calcium is present to help with this. And now muscle contraction occurs, pulling the myosin heads, pull those Z bands, and they get shorter. Okay. Another component that we have is troponin and tropomyosin. Okay, so there's troponin and there's tropomyosin. Troponin is the binding site for that myosin head. Okay, there's the myosin head. And tropomyosin is like a protein fiber that allows the troponin to exist on. Okay, so these are all proteins, and they allow for the binding of actin and myosin to take place. Okay. Okay, muscle movements. So different types of contraction. Okay, so we have an isotonic contraction. Okay, this is where the muscle is moving. There's tension in the muscle. Okay, so very simply put, isotonic contraction, the muscle is moving. Okay, so then we divide that into a concentric contraction where the muscle is shortening in its length. Okay, so this is where the muscle gets shorter. Okay, so it would be like grabbing a bar and doing a bicep curl. Okay, so you're bending the elbow and the bicep gets smaller. That is concentric. Eccentric is where the muscle increases in length, so the muscle gets longer. So back to the bicep curl analogy, or example, it would be allowing your arms to extend. Okay, so you curl the bar and then you extend and you curl and extend. Okay, so eccentric, the muscle gets longer. Okay, we have um, an agonist muscle. Okay, an agonist muscle helps the muscle to move. Okay, helps the muscle to move. They create normal range of movement. These are also known as prime movers. Okay, this is the word I tend to use. So a prime mover is the main muscle doing the moving. So back to our bicep curl example. All right. Now think about this. This is a little weird to think about when you're in a kinesiology setting, a sports medicine setting, a research setting. Okay. You've got a person standing in front of you and you're having them do a bicep curl. So they have a bar in their hand and you want them to curl the bar. And the question is, what muscle is this person contracting in order to do the bicep curl? And if you think about it, every muscle in their body is working. They have to stand there. That takes a lot of muscles. They have to balance. They've got extra weight in their hands. So the different muscles of the body have to offset each other and compensate so you don't fall over. Okay. As soon as you start to curl the bar up, you're changing center of gravity. There's movement involved. So there's a lot of compensating and all that kind of stuff that muscles have to do to contract in order for you just to curl a bar. So you're like, what do you mean? What muscle are they contracting? They're contracting everything. All the leg muscles, all the butt muscles, the core, the back, everything. Okay. So, of course, you could certainly go down that route and start splitting hairs with what muscles are contracting. All right. So then we break it down to make that argument easier and say, okay, well, then what muscle is doing the most work during this particular activity? That would be the prime mover. So if you're curling a bar, then the bicep brachii muscle is doing the main work. Okay. So to move away from splitting hairs with what muscles, because technically you're using all of your muscles, then we break them down into the prime movers. So that's what we mean by agonist. So if you're laying down on a bench and you're doing a bench press with an Olympic bar, okay, yeah, all the muscles in your body are at work, but what's doing the main movement with that particular action? Well, your chest muscles, the pectoralis major. That's the prime mover in that case. Okay. Um, so for our purposes, I'm not going to split hairs with you on that kind of stuff. We're not going to do any tricky things, right? So in other words, person is standing there doing a bicep curl. What muscles are being contracted? And then I list all these muscles, and you're like, well, what the heck? Because every muscle is being contracted. Okay. I'm not going to do that. We're going to focus on the prime mover. Okay. What's the main muscle doing the movement during a bicep curl? What's the main muscle being used during a bench press? All right. Stuff like that. If you're doing a calf raise, what's the main muscle being used? Well, the answer is the calf, in fancy terms, the gastrocnemius. All right. So just try to look at it from that perspective. Is we're going to, once the time comes, we're going to focus on what muscle is the prime mover. And so when you're looking at those muscle videos, that's where the action comes in. Okay. So the action of this muscle is, and that's what we'll focus on for our purposes. Now, if you all end up going to more advanced kinesiology studies, then down the road you can split hairs and it gets ridiculous. That stuff gets crazy. I've been there and you're just like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe this. And it gets fancy. How detailed they get with the pecking order of muscle contractions. Okay, an antagonist is the opposite muscle that's being contracted. So back to our bicep brachii, which is muscle in your arm. If you're doing a bicep curl, the antagonistic muscle in that case would be the tricep. Okay, so it's typically the opposite corresponding muscle is going to be the antagonist. The muscle that is acting in opposition to that prime movement, and it is the muscle responsible for returning the limb back to its initial position. So if you're doing a bicep curl, the opposite muscle is the tricep. So that would be the antagonistic muscle. If you're looking at your quadricep muscle, which is your front thigh muscle, its opposite is the hamstrings on the backside. Okay. So for the most part, there's a lot of muscles in your body that have an opposite muscle. There's always the front side and the back side, the agonist and the antagonist. Okay. A synergistic muscle, a synergistic muscle are the muscles that they assist in performing that joint motion. So if let's go back to you're laying on the bench and you're doing a bench press. Okay. Yes, you're using your chest muscles, but you're also using your tricep to do that action. Okay. You're gripping the bar, so you're using your forearm muscles as well. So these would be synergistic muscles, muscles that assist in doing the movement. Okay. Fixators are the muscles that are designed to provide the necessary support. And I really like the term stabilizers. That's my favorite term for it. Your fixators are also known as your stabilizers. And in my world, with rehab and PT and neuromusculoskeletal conditions and all that stuff I deal with, this is one of the main things that I focus on with people is getting your stabilizers healthier. Because if you have a joint in an area like your shoulder, for example, or your knee that's hurt, okay, we've got to get the stabilizer muscles healthier to make the joint and the area better. If you have low back pain, we got to get the stabilizer muscles healthier so that it can help with your low back pain. So I do a lot of work with stabilizing muscles. The other cool thing about doing stabilizing muscles is you can do these at home. You don't have to have a gym membership to do the kind of rehab necessary to get the area better. Okay. So, in other words, the exercises in the rehab I give people, they are designed to not only strengthen the stabilizers, but they're easy and stuff you can do at home. Now, if I get a more advanced person that is into all that stuff, they want to go to the gym, they want the advanced training, then we'll go there. But most people in general don't want that because it's just not part of their lifestyle. They're not really into exercise. They're sedentary. They work at a desk. They watch TV all the time. They're just not interested. And no matter how hard you try, they're just not going to change. So you have to come up with things that take like 1 to 3 minutes that they can do at home that will go a long way. And I show them and they're like, okay, I can do that. All right, that's easy. I can do that. I can do it at home. It doesn't take long and it helps. Okay. And that's our starting point. And then we'll take it as far as you want to go, all the way to some advanced things. working on the stabilizers. Um, okay, this is muscle energy. So basically, where we get our fuel from and how all the fuel stuff works. So we do need ATP in order to function, in order for our body to work. This is our fuel. All right. So here's kind of in a nutshell what happens. You need oxygen to be delivered to the mitochondria of the cell. And when that happens, you get ATP production, and ATP is fuel for the body. All right. So, like, let's look at a heart, for example. Actually, once you boil it down to the bottom line with heart attack, what you've done is cut off oxygen to tissue. So that's your ischemia. And because of that, the mitochondria is no longer getting oxygen, which means it's no longer producing ATP, which means there's no fuel, which means the heart cells stop beating, they stop working. Okay. So ATP is very important for our body in order for it to work and the fuel to take place. I actually take a supplement called ATP Ignite. And this is one of the best things you can take that's like legal. Probably the only other thing that would give you energy like this would probably be methamphetamine. And don't want you to take that. But this ATP Ignite is a specialized formula that gives you the fuel or gives you the ingredients to make your ATP. Okay, now we're supposed to get this from diet anyway, but you know, a lot of people don't really have let's just say a proper diet. Okay, and even if you are eating as clean and as healthy as possible, um, our soil. Now listen, what I'm about to say, this is true. Okay, it's a little weird to think of it this way, but this is just the reality of the situation, of our situation. Um, because our soil is depleted of a lot of micronutrients and all that stuff that soil needs to grow healthy produce, even if you eat clean and organically, you are still not getting the nutrients that you should be getting. Okay. And that has been studied. There's a lot of documentation out there about this. So, like, here's one that I heard, and this was from, let's see, it was out of Arizona, the Clinical Nutritional Therapy, so the CNT program, and they do a lot of research out of someplace in Arizona. I forget the actual location, but it's part of the Clinical Nutritional Therapy program. And one study that I read by them is, in their best estimate, today's organic apple and the nutrients in it, okay, just today's organic apple takes 26 apples of consumption to equal one apple from a long time ago, before the industrial revolution and machines and chemicals and pesticides and over farmed soil and, you know, airborne and waterborne and soil-borne pollutants and all that stuff that are byproducts of factories and manufacturing things, and on it goes, right? The usual suspects for your environmental stuff. Okay. Now, I'm not trying to pick on the environmental things. I'm just saying that's just what's happening. Okay. It's just a thing. We have toxins and, you know, byproducts and on it goes. So even if you eat organically, which I do recommend, I do think it's a good thing because they try to stay away from as many chemicals as possible, you're still not getting the nutrients that you need. So then it's recommended that you supplement because you're supplementing extra nutrients that you are not really getting, even in a good, clean diet. Okay. So this clinical nutritional therapy program, when they did their studies and all their kind of thing, they said, to just to give you an idea, today's best apple, it takes 26 of them to equal one apple from a long time ago. That's how much nutrients we're missing. Okay. It's kind of crazy to think of it that way. And there's other, you know, there, we could talk forever about that stuff. There's so many uh, studies out there these days that show you the nutritional deficiencies that people are getting. And a lot of it has to do with the way food is grown and just the deficiencies that come with it. Okay. So then what they do is they will compensate and make up for the deficiencies by making really, really good uh, supplement lines. Like, for example, greens. Okay. There's different companies out there that make this thing called greens. And what they do is they take, you know, your spinach and kale and, um, you know, all the different produce things that, you know, are out there, and then they add digestive enzymes to it, and they add resveratrol, and they add, you know, all these things that we know are healthy for your gut, healthy for your body. And what you're supposed to do is you basically just take one scoop of that a day, depending on the brand, you know, 1 to 2 scoops a day, and that should satisfy the nutrients that you are likely missing even in a healthy regular diet. Okay. So this ATP Ignite that I take, what the, you know, through engineering and biochemistry and all the stuff that we know these days, they know the different ingredients your body needs in order to make this fuel. So, for example, they put, you know, vitamin C in it, vitamin E, the riboflavin, niacin, and on that goes. And then they add uh, the L-arginine and the acetyl L-carnitine and L-glutathione and stuff like that, right? So they take these ingredients that your body would otherwise get from a diet and they concentrate it into a formula, and you simply take it. And then your body knows what to do with those ingredients that you just consumed. And it, like, you can almost look at it this way, mega dosing your body with all this cool stuff, and your cells go, thank you. The mitochondria goes, thank you. Now I've got the ingredients to make what I need to make in adequate amounts. So it does. And it gives you this energy, and it gives you this amazingness that I'm telling you, you'll, it's just a good feeling. Okay. Now, the counter argument I'll get from people is, well, I'm just going to get that from diet. It's like, okay, like, so I have to rely on supplements for the rest of my life. It's like, well, no, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to take supplements. You don't have to eat clean. You don't have to stop smoking. You don't have to do anything. Okay. But what happens is if you choose to start consuming things that are good for you, whether it's eating clean, organic foods, supplementing, and that kind of stuff, um, all that's going to do is just it's going to help you in your health and wellness overall. That's what it does. Is it helps you age into a healthy body. It helps you resist disease better. Okay, it helps you with your stamina throughout the day. It helps with brain nutrition, right? You're giving your body ingredients to actually make the things it needs to make. Neurotransmitters, digestive enzymes, and different energy that come out of the mitochondria cells, and on it goes. Okay, and our body is one big chemical component, and it needs nutrition in order to survive. So you become nutrient deficient. Now you're going down a path of unhealth. And if it's gradual nutrient deficient, it's just going to take you longer to show the unhealthiness. Okay. Versus, some people that it's just everything is terrible. So they get unhealthy quicker in life. Okay. So the bottom line is um, it is important to think about overall health and wellness. And if you keep it simple, if you keep it very simple, it's just the basics of some exercise, which is 3 to 5 days a week, 30 minutes of brisk walking. Okay. It's about as simple as it gets. And basics of nutrition. You try to stay away from pro inflammatory foods, stay away from artificial foods and too much sugar. Okay. Limit your alcohol consumption and stay hydrated, right? You eat as clean as you can, and then you just supplement with a few basic things. And that's about as simple as it gets. And what that does is it puts you way ahead of the curve with a healthy life, okay? Aging into a healthy body, resisting disease better, and not feeling so fatigued and tired and burnt out, and on that goes. All right. So, um, with the energy that we get, the ATP, all right, there's some immediate storage for you that will give you 4 to 6 seconds worth of ATP energy. Okay. So this is enough to start the muscle contraction. There's immediate fuel that's there long enough to give you about 4 to 6 seconds worth of using this energy. Now, if you are highly trained, like um, what's his name? Hussein Bolt. Okay. So Hussein Bolt is, a world record holder, an Olympian. He does the 100-meter dash, considered the fastest man in the world. And so, in other words, you can look at him as a highly trained athlete. Okay. And because of his training and genetic makeup and all the other cool stuff, his ATP storage can be about 10 seconds. All right. So he went from the average person, which is 4 to 6 seconds, and was able to get it up to about 10 seconds. So if you look at his time in the 100-meter dash, uh, it's 9 point something. Hold on, let me look that up real quick, what his record is. Um, looks like 9.58. Okay. 9.58. So in other words, that's under 10 seconds. All right. Now I remember reading articles from a long time ago. The exercise physiologist did not think a human could do the 100-meter dash in under 10 seconds because of this. Because the ATP storage for immediate energy is only 4 to 6 seconds. So they didn't think a long time ago a human could go under 10 seconds in the 100-meter dash. Um, they also said the same thing about the mile. Okay. I think they said a long time ago no one can go under 4 minutes in the mile, and someone eventually broke that. Anyway, human performance, we keep on moving the human standard bar, right? We keep getting better and better and faster, bigger and stronger, that kind of thing. I mean, look at gymnasts, Olympian gymnasts from a long time ago. I mean, they did great work, but today, good grief, man, the stuff these, uh, gymnasts can do, especially at the Olympic level, is just mind blowing. Very, very incredible acrobatic and strength and all that stuff that they have. Well, anyway, what's pretty cool is that 9.58 is his body is able to rely on that immediate storage of ATP, and has, through training and genetics and nutrition and all that. And what I mean by genetics, I mean, let's just be honest. You just have to be lucky and be able to be born with the ability to do what you do in the athletic world. I mean, take LeBron James, for example. How the heck did he get the body that he has? I mean, that's genetic. And then he took advantage of it and enhanced it through training and nutrition to become, one of the greatest basketball players of all time. And notice I said one of the greatest. Some of people argue with me. He's not the greatest basketball player. Everyone pulls Michael Jordan. He's the greatest. uh, but definitely one of the greatest. Okay. And of course, we could go on with all the different athletes in the world. And, they're born with the ability to just be crazy athletic, and then they enhance it through training and nutrition. Okay. So Usain Bolt did that and was able to get his ATP stores up and rely on that to do the 100-meter dash. Very impressive work. Okay. When you look at it from a physiology perspective. Okay. So we have 3 pathways for getting ATP. Okay. One pathway is called direct phosphorylation by creatinine phosphase. Second one is aerobic respiration. And the third one is anaerobic glycolysis and lactic acid formation. Okay. With direct phosphorylation, okay, ADP is adenosine plus a phosphate plus a phosphate. Okay. And you're missing that third one. So when you directly phosphorylate, you're taking that extra phosphate and you're adding it, which turns it into A plus the 3 phosphates. So that's your ATP. So you're going from ADP, adenosine diphosphate, to ATP or triphosphate because of direct phosphorylation, adding that extra phosphate because of the creatine phosphate. Okay. So the creatine phosphate, which is the CP, is a very high energy molecule. It's found in muscle fibers. Okay, the creatine travels from the liver to other tissues where it's converted into the creatine phosphate. Now, in the mid 90s, I think around 1995, don't quote me on that, but I think around 1995, they invented the creatine supplement. Okay, so it was a powder form. If you didn't know any different, it would just look like protein powder, but it was creatine, and it was supposed to enhance your body's ability to tap into this creatine phosphate idea to make your workouts better. Okay, and it does work, and then people still use it today. Creatine is also obtained from diet. You can get it from meats, animal products and other foods. There's small amounts in foods, but it's still there. And your body can take that creatine. It leaves the liver, converted into creatine phosphate, and used as energy. Okay. You get it from the glycine and arginine. Okay, so these are uh, amino acids you get from diet. Okay, so the creatine phosphate provides a small reservoir of high energy phosphates that are ready to create your ATP from your ADP. So your ADP, adenosine diphosphates, floating around. You've got these extra phosphates floating around everywhere, and your body goes, "Oh, I need to get this there. No problem. I'll get the creatine phosphate involved." So it comes over, binds, and allows the attachment to take place. Okay, you don't have to know this chart, but it's just this is a biochemistry formula, and it's here to show you what happens. Okay, so the kidneys take the glycine and basically sends it to the liver to be synthesized, and the liver will do its fancy biochemical formula to eventually give you the creatine phosphate. Okay, your body will use that to add the phosphate to the adenosine diphosphate for the energy. And then when you're done, it is converted into creatinine, which is the byproduct of muscle breakdown or muscle contraction and all that energy breakdown. And you eventually expel that in the urine. Okay, your muscle cells store about 5 times more creatine phosphate than ATP. Okay, so the ATP will last about 4 to 6 seconds. So if you need the immediate fuel to come in, it's there for you. Lasts about 4 to 6 seconds. And the supplies can last up to about 20 seconds. Now back to Usain Bolt going in under 10 seconds. Got to keep in mind, he's going at 100%. Okay. Most of us do not exercise at 100%. You do not give it everything that you have. So if you only give it, let's say 50% during your exercise, yeah, you can get those stores up to about 20 seconds worth. But if you give it everything you've got, you're going to burn through that fuel very quickly. And so he was able to get it from 4 to 6 seconds up to 10 seconds. All right, the second one is aerobic respiration. Aerobic means with oxygen. Okay, so just to try to keep all this simple, at about, you start exercising, let's say you're jogging, okay? So you go out for a jog, right? So from minute 0 to minute 5, your body is going through certain fuel. Okay, your body is going through different fuels. Once you get to minute 5, this is where just to keep this simple, the endurance stuff kicks in, which means you can last 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, okay, 120 minutes, or whatever, however long your run is, or your bike, or your swim, and all the different aerobic events you can do. Once you hit about that 5-minute mark, then you can just keep going. Okay. So this occurs because you're now in the oxygen, using a lot of oxygen, and you're doing oxidative phosphorylation. Okay, there's your phosphate. Okay, there's that phosphate. And now oxygen is being responsible for the formation of these high energy bonds. So oxygen is doing the phosphate attaching. All right. Glucose is broken down into carbon dioxide and water. Okay, some of that energy that's released from the breakdown is captured in the bonds of the ATP molecules. So this aerobic respiration, okay, so with oxygen, aerobic respiration gives you about 36 ATP per one glucose molecule. So if you've ever heard the expression carb up, okay, so let's say tomorrow is your Colfax Marathon, okay, or the Boulder. It would be very common for people that are training together and whatever to say, don't forget to carb up. All right. What they're really saying is, and they may not know they're saying this, but what they're really saying is, I want you to get a lot of sugar in your body. Okay. Now remember, carbs is sugar. So I want you to get a lot of sugar in your body so your body can store this so that when you go on your run tomorrow, you're going to tap in beautifully into this aerobic respiration. So carb up. So usually endurance athletes have a high carbohydrate diet, especially the night before a race. Because what they're trying to do is increase the amount of glucose so that their body, once it gets into the aerobic respiration, which starts at about minute 5, okay, back to our graph, right? The minute 0 to minute 5. And then after minute 5, you can just keep going because now you're tapping into aerobic respiration. And your body is now spitting out 36 ATP per glucose. Now, this is slow, okay? It's a slow process. Takes time to get there, roughly your 5 minutes. And once you get there, that continuous delivery of oxygen keeps this fuel going, keeps the 36 ATP per glucose. Okay. And so if you're very fit and you're really good at doing, let's just say, marathons, your body is doing this beautifully. Now, if you're not fit because you haven't trained in running, that's okay. Yes, the first day you get out there and run a mile, it's going to suck. At the end of the mile, you're going to want to die. But your body will adapt. If you keep training and keep programming your body to do this, eventually that mile feels good. And now you can go 2 miles. And if you keep training, 2 miles is no longer enough. Now you have to go 3. Then you go 5. Then you go 10. And you just keep going. Okay. Because your body will adapt to the training. And you start to efficiently use your different fuel mechanisms. You produce more red blood cells, better oxygen carrying capacity. Okay. And on it goes as good and positive side effects of exercising. All right. So in our example here, let's just pretend that we have a fit person and they're trained for a marathon. So once they get going, their body is going to go through the different energy phases. And once they get into aerobic respiration, which usually begins at about minute 5, and then they can just keep going, the continual delivery of oxygen helps produce the ATP, and you get 36 of it per glucose. Okay, the third one is anaerobic glycolysis and lactic acid formation. So anaerobic means without oxygen. Okay, This energy pathway does not use oxygen. Okay, this requires strictly glycolysis stuff. Now, glycolysis, okay, glycolysis, lysis is the breakdown of something. And whatever lysis is attached to, that's what you're breaking down. Okay, in this case, we're breaking down glucose. So it is the breakdown of glucose that is the initial step here for energy. Okay, this occurs in the cytosol of the cell. So glucose is broken down into pyruvic acid. Okay, glucose is broken down into pyruvic acid. Okay, the small amounts of energy that are captured gives you 2 ATP per glucose molecule. Okay, in anaerobic, you get 2 for 1. In aerobic, which means with oxygen, you get 36 for 1. But in anaerobic, you get 2 for 1, 2 ATP per glucose molecule. So pyruvic acid now enters the pathway, which occurs in the mitochondria to produce the ATP. When muscle activity is too great, making oxygen and glucose inadequate to meet the exercise demands, the slow aerobic mechanism cannot keep up with the demands for ATP. Okay. So pyruvic acid gets generated during the glycolysis and then is converted into lactic acid. And there's some, let's just say, rumors that say the lactic acid is what contributes to the muscle soreness, right? So um, now that is, it's more complicated than that, where muscle soreness comes from. But part of the ingredients of muscle soreness is that conversion into lactic acid. Okay, so the anaerobic glycolysis produces about 5% as much than aerobic. So it's not as much as aerobic metabolism. However, anaerobic glycolysis is 2.5 times faster than aerobic. Okay, so it can provide most of the ATP needed for 30 to 60 seconds of strenuous muscle activity. So these people are really good at sprints. Okay, these people are really good at sprinting. Now, I swam in college and I was a sprinter and I was sprint free and butterfly. I was also part of a study because at the time when I was swimming, creatine was up and coming. And so our exercise physiologist on campus decided to do a study to compare swimmers who are supposed to have a good aerobic base. They compared them with the cross country team who's supposed to have a good aerobic base. And then they compared it to lay people who, meaning they don't, they're not in sports, they don't run, they don't do anything, right? They just kind of do daily activities and that's about it. So I was involved in that and I was hooked up to a VO2 max machine and on a treadmill and all this stuff. And it was really, honestly, it sucked because they work you to death. But it was also pretty cool to be a part of a study. And then what they did is they tested all of us first with no creatine. And then they tested us later after we took creatine to see what the difference was. And they wanted to compare runners and swimmers and just daily activity people just to see what's going on. So that was kind of neat. Um, Anyway, so sprinters are usually pretty good at anaerobic glycolysis, and they use large amounts of glucose. And you can imagine if you're, training at a high level, we were eating around 6,000 calories a day. I mean, I don't think I could do that today, but if you're burning a lot of fuel, you got to eat a lot of fuel. Um, so when the accumulation of the lactic acid does promote some of that muscle fatigue and muscle soreness. It is more complicated than that. I'm not going to get into all of that physiology with you of what contributes to muscle soreness, but just know that lactic acid is part of it, and there are other ingredients involved that contribute to that muscle soreness. Okay, muscle fatigue. So if you exercise long enough, your muscles do eventually fatigue. And the fatigue occurs when the muscle is unable to contract even though it is still being stimulated. It's usually because of oxygen debt, so not enough oxygen is being delivered to tissue at this point. So your red blood cells, your hemoglobin, and all that's involved, you're just kind of running out. Okay. Uh, so back to the training thing. This is the idea behind training: is to increase your red blood cells as much as you can, to increase your hemoglobin, to increase your oxygen carrying capacity so you can last longer. That's why a lot of people come to Colorado to train, because we are at altitude. And when you move to an altitude place like Colorado, the oxygen in the air is less, so it forces your body to work harder to produce red blood cells and all that stuff that goes with it. So what they do is at sea level, okay, like California, Florida, Hawaii, okay, these are places where a lot of elite events take place. Okay, California, Hawaii, and Florida, a lot of big events take place there. So people will go from sea level and then they go up to a place like Colorado, okay, because we are a mile above sea level. So there's less oxygen up here. So by doing that and training, they basically supersaturate themselves with red blood cells because of the erythropoietin. Okay, we haven't talked, I don't think we've talked about that yet. That's an ANP2 thing. So you produce a lot of oxygen, and then what you do is you go back down to sea level to perform. And you do amazing. I'm telling you, this works great. I did it once a long time ago. Honestly, I didn't mean to. That wasn't in the, I did not do it intentionally. What happened is I moved from sea level to Colorado, and at the time I was training for triathlons, and I was doing, really, really good training. The endurance was amazing, and I'm training at altitude, and I went to San Diego at the time to do this race. And I remember as I was, running and all that, I was like, why do I feel so good? It's supposed to be hurting by now, right? When you start running and stuff, at some point it just kind of hurts. And I noticed I just wasn't hurting, and I kept waiting for that um, aerobic, um, the aerobic part to kick in, which starts at about 5 minutes. And I never really felt it kick in. And then it dawned on me, I was like, oh, this is what it feels like to run from training at altitude and then go to sea level. This is great. It really is a good feeling. So if you guys ever get the opportunity to train at altitude and then go to sea level to perform, it's worth it. It's really cool. Okay, so once you start running out of ATP, um, and you start to be deprived of oxygen, and the pyruvic acid is converted into lactic acid, okay, the muscle starts to contract less. So less oxygen, less ATP, more lactic acid, the muscles begin to contract less. This is where muscle fatigue comes from. Okay, with muscle tone, so skeletal muscle activity is constantly occurring. Even when you're sleeping, your muscles are constantly in this tone form. So the fibers are always contracting. This allows for the muscles to stay firm, to stay healthy, and constantly ready for action. All right, so this state of continuous partial muscle contraction is called muscle tone. This occurs because of the different motor units being stimulated by the nervous system. And if you watch someone sleep, okay, and I don't mean this in a creepy way, I promise, I don't mean this in a creepy way, but look, if you have a family, a spouse, you have kids, even if you have a dog, just watch them sleep. And I mean, really watch them. Just kind of stare at them. Yeah, in a kind of creepy way, but not really because it's family. Just watch them. You'll notice that they actually twitch and move, and it's very subtle, but they actually move during sleep. This is your nervous system constantly keeping that muscle tone going. Okay. And this is a good thing. So, just to give you a visual, if you really want to see this, watch someone sleep and you'll see the nervous system at work constantly sending these signals to the muscles to stay toned. And you see these little flutters, these little twitches, these little things, even throughout sleep. Okay, the effects of exercise on the muscle. If you don't stimulate the muscle, you risk atrophy, which means the muscle gets smaller in size. So, sedentary lifestyle, bedridden patients, elderly, hospice care, there's some really sad situations out there. It just happens. And a side effect is they're going to get atrophy. If you stimulate the muscle, you can get hypertrophy, which means the muscle increases in size. Okay, aerobic means with oxygen. So these are your endurance events. Some of the benefits that come with aerobic exercise is increased blood supply, more muscle cell form, more mitochondria form, more oxygen is stored. It improves digestion, healthy for skeletal muscle, increases metabolism, enhances neuromuscular coordination, enlarges the heart in a good way. The heart's a muscle, you're exercising it. By enlarging the heart, you increase stroke volume. Okay, you increase lung improvement in their gas exchange. So these are good things. Also, it helps with stress management. Okay, a lot of benefits to exercising and stress management and depression. It can help with depression. Aerobic does not really increase the size of your muscles. Okay, you don't really become a bodybuilder by running. All right, so typically aerobic does not increase muscle size. Muscle mass comes from anaerobic training. So your eccentric, concentric muscle contractions with resistance. So in other words, you're like lifting weights. Results in the breakdown of muscle tissue. And because of the breakdown, your body will repair it. So you create little micro tears in the muscle, new protein comes in, it builds up. You break those down, new proteins come in, build up the muscle tissue, and thus you increase in muscle size. So you get enlargement of muscle cells, you get more contractile filaments, which is part of the growth and repair phase. So in other words, weight lifting is an anaerobic form of training. So you don't really get a lot of endurance behind it, but you do increase in muscle mass. All right, any questions with any of that?